So today we are going over 10 things that people actually get wrong about fat loss. Now, whether you were starting a diet, whether you were getting ready for a bodybuilding show, or just trying to get to ultra low body fat levels, these are the traps, myths, and realities that most people never see coming. Now, if you've ever felt blindsided by fat loss, discouraged by slow progress, or realistically, you just want to understand what's normal and what isn't, this video is for you. So, number one, fat loss is actually easiest at the beginning when body fat's higher. And let's get this out of the way. Depending on how much body fat you have to lose, this can heavily affect how hard the diet actually feels and whether you're actually able to keep the weight off even after the fact. But why is it that fat loss is actually easiest at the beginning of a diet? It's simple. This comes down to dietary fatigue. And at the beginning of a diet, there really shouldn't be any. Now, dietary fatigue is ultimately what makes it harder for you to stick to a diet, for you to maintain training performance, for you to manage stress. And the sad thing is, whether or not you lose body fat, dietary fatigue is going to accrue in the background regardless. So my advice, don't wait to get serious and to be committed to actually losing body fat. There's going to be a point where dietary fatigue is really difficult to ignore. And that might be the point where you need to call the diet in itself and you need to transition into a reverse diet, into a build, into maintenance. You don't want to be in a position where dietary fatigue is high and the results of the fat loss phase are lackluster. Number two, expect it to be uncomfortable. The truth is, most people are going to find that eating less than they need to maintain body fat levels is not going to be really fun. It's not going to be very comfortable, and the longer that you do it and the leaner that you get, the harder it's going to be to manage. Now, this doesn't mean to suffer for the sake of suffering. There are definitely right and wrong ways to go about creating a deficit. And although we want to strike a balance between what you can handle so that you can actually handle it versus seeing the progress that you're after, we also want to make sure that you have realistic expectations from the start. I think it's helpful out the gate to accept there's going to be some hunger, there's going to be some discomfort, you're going to feel tired because quite literally your body doesn't want to do what you're making it do. This is where it's important to audit and give a real assessment as to whether this discomfort is actually manageable. Managing fatigue as a whole, whether it be dietary, training, just overall allostatic load, is a skill. And I think for a lot of people, they underestimate what getting to low body fats is actually going to cost in terms of their global stress levels. And although it might be uncomfortable the first time you do it, you can absolutely develop systems and build in tactics that help you manage this discomfort better. You're just going to have to be patient, though, in developing these systems and finding what works for you. Number three, you're going to need to fight to maintain training performance. One of the biggest shocks for people is that they're expected to still train hard even when they're eating less. Listen, calories going down, recovery is also going to follow suit. Training is going to feel harder. Day to day is going to feel harder. And for me, I find that I really have to be intentional going into these sessions and even well before these sessions to make sure that I can still produce that same output session to session. For a lot of people, it takes real focus to maintain your lifts, to not lose reps, to uphold that training performance. But ultimately, this is what's going to keep muscle on your frame, even in the pursuit of a lower body fat level. And sure, there are modifications that you can make in order to create more external support, depending on the types of lifts that you're doing. But a lot of it's going to be mental. A lot of it's going to require you wanting it and you demanding that your body lift at a higher capacity than it's going to want to. Number four, progress won't be linear, especially for female clients. This is the reality that we just have to accept. There are going to be weeks, and for some of us, that might be 2 weeks out of the month where we're faced with artificial inflations. And some of this can be hormonally driven. Some of this can be pretty predictable. Even if you do everything perfectly, scale weight fluctuations are expected. I can say I don't have any clients who come to me and on a weekly basis, 7 days a week, they get a linear drop in scale weight. It just doesn't happen. And I do have a short video on this as to explain why that might be. I also have a longer video where I go into all of the variables that can affect scale weight. The important thing is that you have a level head when it comes to seeing these fluctuations and that you don't stress yourself out, wind yourself up, and begin to convince yourself that you're doing something wrong or something has to change when these inflations are truly in itself artificial. Some weeks you might lose a little bit more, even if you change nothing. Some weeks you might lose less. And that's where it's really important to have good systems in place that reflect the most accurate data that you can collect. Now, this in itself is a big reason that I like to look at the weekly average as well as comparatively the range, so the high and low this week as opposed to the last several weeks. Don't let the day-to-day noise stress you out. It is pulling from the limited resources that you already have. And honestly, you're probably going to find that if you just be patient, decompress a little bit, that scale weight does level out within a few days. Number 5, your curves are gonna shrink unless you're already shredded. A lot of people, they want to get leaner. They want to have shredded, peeled, defined abs. They want to have veins in their arms. They want to have cuts in their legs, but they don't want to lose their curves. The truth is, when you lose fat, you lose it everywhere. That means, yes, your butt, your chest, your hips, all of these curvy areas will get smaller unless you're already at a really low body fat percentage. Now, how do we avoid this? How do we reduce the collateral of losing those curves that make us feel very feminine? This comes down to having enough muscle underneath the fat so that as you lose fat, you don't lose shape. We can't select where the fat's going to come off. And if you have physical landmarks and aesthetic goals that require you lose body fat, it's going to come at the cost of also losing some of those curves. Unless you take time to intentionally build in those areas that are prone to lose more body fat than others. Number 6, libido is likely going to go down. And this is one that people do not talk about nearly enough. Low calories, hormonal changes, even just more allostatic stress. This is all going to create an environment that will have some degree of an impact on your sex drive. And it's not forever, but it is very real. And it's not something you should ignore. For some people who are very sensitive to these changes in hormonal states and energy levels, this effect can be pretty significant. Now, although we know that this is normal and an expected adaptation when getting to low body fat levels or being in a caloric deficit for an extended period of time, this is one of those trade-offs that we really have to consider when we're mapping out and designing a timeline, especially if you have a lot of weight to lose. And even more so if you're going to be competing and you're going to be in and out of this state pretty frequently. The good news is, for most, libido is going to rebound. And it's likely going to return to its baseline where it was before. But this is exactly why we need to be intentional with our fat loss phases. And especially for the individual who's very sensitive to these changes in sexual performance and sex drive. If someone is experiencing this despite food already coming back up and despite not being at an ultra low body fat, this is definitely something that we need to dig into because it very well could be hormonally driven. Number 7, you will live and die by your sleep hygiene. Now, sleep is one of those things that a lot of people, they can romanticize, they can stretch themselves thin and say, well, I feel just as good off 5 to 6 hours. I really don't need that much sleep. Thing is, our bodies say differently. And especially when you're in a state where energy availability is limited, your body's going to seek out reprieve from either sleep or food. And if you're restricting calories, it's going to lean towards the only other option that it has. So for individuals that struggle seeing that consistent fat loss as they get leaner, one of the first things I take a look at is their sleep hygiene. And no, you don't have to go buy an expensive wearable. Even just being consistent with tracking the duration, whether or not you feel good the next day, whether or not you feel rested, and just generally your energy levels, that can be really insightful. Poor sleep, whether that be not enough or poor quality, is going to increase hunger signaling, making it that much harder to stay on track and be compliant with your diet. It's also going to slow recovery and make it really difficult to maintain training performance and thereby muscle mass. A single night of bad sleep can have residual effects in a lot of ways, specifically hormonally. This is why I can't stress this enough. Prioritize your sleep, Have strict boundaries around your sleep hygiene. Let your partner, your family members, whoever you live with, let them know that this is something that you need as a fundamental baseline. You need to have good sleep hygiene and consistent sleep hygiene. And one of the biggest game changers for me was, instead of setting a time that I needed to be up by, I would look at the time I needed to be asleep by. So even though you might say, well, I typically fall asleep pretty quickly, I only need 8 hours, 8 hours should be plenty, give yourself a little bit of a buffer. You can't predict when stress is going to creep up on you and make it difficult to not just get to sleep, but stay asleep. Number 8, cheat meals can actually set you back more than you think. Listen, I am not anti-cheat meal. I am not overly rigid when it comes to tracking myself or for my clients, but I think we have to be really honest about how much damage we can do, especially when hunger is dysregulated and we've been dieting for a long time. And I actually do have a video out where I go through cheat meals, refeeds, diet breaks, and how each of them can be applied effectively, and also where they can go wrong. Now, especially in the case that you're someone who has a big appetite, or you're someone who is not in that big of a deficit to begin with, and you're also struggling to see progress on a weekly basis. One huge meal, and I say meal lightly because I know how it goes. It can turn into appetizer, entree, dessert, and then on the way back home, you could stop and get snacks. You could have things at home that you get into even though the meal is technically supposed to be over. These periods of overfeeding, which, very much resemble a binge, can wipe out an entire week's worth of progress. They can cause water retention, they can slow digestion, and they can mess with your mindset and your self-efficacy. You can absolutely use a cheat meal and have it be effective in dropping off dietary fatigue. But I think for a lot of people, this is going to require having parameters and having realistic expectations based on those parameters. Number 9, it's going to be hard to maintain the deficit indefinitely for most people. Getting lean is hard in itself. But maintaining a point where there are these physiological adaptations, and every day there is a physical, mental, even emotional sacrifice, it's not really going to be sustainable depending on how hard it is for you. This is why it's really important to make sure that when you're establishing how lean you want to get, how much weight you want to lose, that you're also considering that there's going to be an inherent cost. And to lose, a little bit of weight, that cost might be worth it. And it might be something that is very easy for you to maintain after the diet's over. But the leaner that you want to get, the lower body fat percentage is going to get, and the more dysregulated that this puts you in terms of your hormonal landscape, the harder it's going to be to sustain this. This is why I really encourage clients to think about the habits that they're building in the process of getting as lean as they want to be. Because if every day is a struggle, if every day they're exhausting themselves of willpower and discipline, it's only a matter of time before it catches up with them and they want to throw in the towel. If you're losing weight and you want to get to this target and ultimately sustain that new body fat level or that body weight, it's important to build systems around this new physique, this new body composition. This means habits, environments, norms, times when it's okay to deviate, and a degree of fluctuation that you accept as normal. By definition, this is what sustainability looks like, and it needs to be something that you're actively working on and engaging with as you begin to lose weight. Number 10, digestion will slow down. I know it is a bit of a suck, it's a bit of a pain, and for a lot of people, it can be really frustrating when you're not able to go to the bathroom regularly. But here's the truth. When you eat less food, when you move less, when you're in this hypocaloric state, your body is always adjusting and always adapting. And it's not abnormal to see a missed bowel movement, to have some irregularity when it comes to excretion. And for a lot of people, this doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing something wrong, but it's also important to make sure that we're keeping tabs on your fiber intake, your micronutrient intake, and your hydration. All of these things can play a significant role in regularity across digestion, as well as sleep, stress levels, and overall hormonal status. So if you're finding that digestion is becoming more and more regular exponentially, and it's really starting to become a pain point for you, and I'm talking like realistically, you're going multiple days a week without a bowel movement, this isn't something to ignore. I would say that's very much past the point of what's normal. But without having a pulse on all the variables that I mentioned, water, sleep, stress, fiber, micronutrient intake, it's really hard to garner whether or not this is still in that category of typical and due to there being less food volume, or atypical and needing further follow-up. So let's recap. Fat loss, it can be really hard. It's probably not going to be linear, and depending on how lean you want to get, you might not be able to hold on to it nearly as long as you'd like to. This is where building systems, being aware, also understanding the cost and the sacrifice that's associated with getting to these low body fat levels is paramount. But hopefully this video taught you what you can expect, what mistakes I would recommend you avoid, and hopefully helps you see out a more successful fat loss phase. If you found this helpful, hit the like, subscribe, comment button. Let me know what's worked, what hasn't worked, if you agree, disagree. As always, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next one.